I'm Mark Eaton. I'm Secretary of the Rare Breeding Birds Panel, and this presentation is intended as guidance to county bird recorders and others who submit data to the Rare Breeding Bird Panel on the art of estimating county populations of scarce breeding birds as part of their annual submission to the RBBP. So what I'm going to talk about over the next 20 minutes or so is the panel's monitoring work and some of the gaps in species coverage within its monitoring, the purpose of county estimates and how they help us with this issue around gaps in our monitoring, and then finally the important elements of how to do this, advice for county recorders and how they can create county estimates of species within their own counties. Now, the Rare Breeding Bird Panel reports on a very large number of species. Since the formation of the panel and its reporting from 1973 onwards, we've reported on 174 rare breeding species or races in the UK. And those have ranged from the incredibly rare, those species which have never actually bred, but have tried to breed, have showed signs of breeding, maybe a lone male holding a territory, and maybe just once, like the American bittern in Suffolk in 2018, for example. So those great rarities at one end, but then more common species through to those with about 2,000 pairs in the UK. So quite widespread, scarce breeding species. In a typical year, our annual report, covers about 100 species or races, of which 80 are regular breeders that breed in the UK year after year. And those regular breeders we put into classes of abundance, and indeed all the species that occur. You can see in this table, ranging from the potential breeders, species that have never actually bred but may do at some point, the great reed warbler, those that have bred occasionally, blue throat, those that are beginning to breed more regularly, like black-winged stilt, maybe colonising. And then for our more regular breeders, we use these categories of abundance: very rare, rare, scarce, and less scarce, as you can see on there with some examples of the species concerned. And sadly, at the bottom we have the former breeder category for species such as wryneck. When we look at how our regularly occurring species fall into those four categories of abundance, you can see actually they're fairly evenly spread, a few less in the scarce category, but about 20 species in each of those classes. We also assess our regularly occurring breeders in terms of how good our coverage is. In the records that are submitted to the Rare Breeding Bird Panel, how much of the population we are covering every year. From those for which our monitoring is near complete. I mean, for some species it's complete, but we don't want to be so bold as to claim that we couldn't possibly be missing some, but you can see a list of some species there. But we think that more or less all of the breeding attempts in any year are submitted to us and included in our reporting and in our database. We've got species for which you get a high total. We may miss a few records, might not reach us, but we think our estimates, our annual total, are near, pretty good, good for monitoring purposes, tracking the population changes, for example. And as we move down in that table, we get to those species where our coverage is moderate, it's less accurate. We have a significant proportion of the population reported to us, but that may be less than 2/3 of it, maybe around a half of the population, or even less than that for some species in any year. And then finally, we have the low category, those species for which we're only getting a small proportion of the British breeding birds. For some, like Red-breasted Merganser, we may only receive records for 10% of the breeding population in any 1 year, so pretty poor coverage. And here we can see those 80 species spread across these coverage categories. It's good to see that we have near complete coverage for quite a large proportion, high coverage as well, but there are still a substantial number, about 25 or so, for which we only have moderate or low coverage, so species for which we could do better. And if we combine those two classifications in terms of abundance and coverage together, we get this graph. So what I've got here is grouped along the bottom in terms of the abundance, the four abundance classes, from very rare to less scarce. And then within those, the coloured bars showing the quality of the coverage. And we can see for the very rare species, we have near complete coverage for most of them. And we have none for which we think we have low coverage. We have one species for which we have moderate coverage, but we're doing quite good. Well, as we move through the classes to the more abundant, the less scarce classes, we see that we have more species where our coverage is either low or moderate. And I'm sure you can understand the logic in this. The species are more abundant, there are more of them, it gets harder to get complete coverage. The less scarce species for which we have near complete coverage, so those are the more abundant amongst our rare breeders which have good coverage, are things like avocet, where most of them are on reserves and well monitored. But many of these species are more widespread, and so they're sort of exceeding our ability to get them all counted. You see there's two problem groups there. There's another way of looking at the same issue. This is plotting our abundance estimates for the UK, produced by the Avian Population Estimates Panel, most recently published in 2020. These national estimates, UK estimates for all species. That's along the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, I plotted the totals reported by the Red-breasted Bird Panel in our most recent report, the 2018 report. And in an ideal world, all those blue dots, one for each species or race, would sit along the red line in that perfect match between the total population and the numbers reported to us. What we find, as you have most sophisticatedly highlighted here, in that area here we have many species for which a number reported to and then reported by the Red-breasted Bird Panel is far less than the number we believe to be in the UK, the estimate produced from other sources. So we're missing a large proportion of birds in our annual reporting. So this is where the Red-breasted Bird Panel estimates are asking county recorders to submit estimates of some of these poorly covered species comes in. This is why. It's intended to give us a better understanding of the numbers and the distribution of these species, because we're not getting it from the annual returns. To provide context to those annual returns, so we're getting hard data, breeding records of this many pairs reported compared to how many we estimate actually exist in the country as a whole and at the individual county level. That will allow us to identify the strengths and weaknesses in our current monitoring. Where are we getting good monitoring that's reporting on all or nearly all of the breeding attempts, and where are we getting poorer coverage? By doing that, we'll know better how well the RBBP is doing at monitoring, how valuable our data is in terms of tracking the population as a whole. It might give us a better way of estimating the whole population, building up from these county level estimates to a national estimate, rather than some of the other ways the Avian Population Estimates Panel has used in recent years. And also at the bottom, I've commented to ease the frustration for some recorders that they may have a very good idea from various sources of how many of a particular species are present in their county, but might not be able to report that every year because they're not getting that complete data on an annual basis. So by being able to tell us how much they really know, can ease the frustration and make sure that all that knowledge is being properly used. So we began asking for county recorders to submit estimates of the population in their county for a limited number of species back in 2015. It's now 17 species. Originally, we just used this information, referred to it in the text accounts on species accompanying our annual reporting. From 2017, we began collating these estimates at a regional level and putting them in the report, in the tables of species numbers. We're now getting submissions of county estimates from about 2/3 of recorders for 2018. I'm pushing very hard in 2019 to try and get complete coverage, try and get everyone to submit county estimates. And aiming to report these estimates at a county level, not summarising them to the region, reporting them for every county. Should emphasise at this point, this is not intended to replace real monitoring. we don't want county recorders not to submit the real records, the hard data they have on breeding attempts, the locations and numbers of breeding records. We still want that data. That is still the core of rare breeding bird panel reporting. These estimates are intended as additional information, additional contextual information, not to replace that core data collection. Here's an example of reporting in a 2018 report for turtle dove. And you can see, for example, after Southeast West England there, the E37. That is the total of the estimates received from all the counties, the 6 counties in Southwest England there, and then 679 for Southeast England, and so forth. As I said, the intention going forward is not just to provide at a reasonable level, but for all of those individual counties to produce the estimate, in this case for turtle dove. And this is where it happens. County recorders watching this talk will be familiar with this spreadsheet, or they should be. This is the starting page of the data submission spreadsheet that all county recorders are supposed to use to send their records into the rare breeding bird panel. This first page allows space for estimates to be reported before recorders then go on to the records by site tab, which is where they put in all the detailed submissions. Here's the species that we cover. We ask for these estimates for at the moment. There are 17 in all. A couple of the species which haven't been on the panel's list for very long: red-breasted Merganser and turtle dove, and quite a spread of species. They're all in this scarce and less scarce group. Some of these are northern species, red-breasted Merganser, shorted owl, for example. Some are very much southern species, the Eaton species such as woodlark and Dartford warbler. So quite a range. Every county in the UK, I believe, has at least one, if not many more, of these species. No county has all of them because of the spread of habitats and geography that these species require. So hopefully I've talked for long enough for you to have taken that list in. Some examples: pochard, species that's underreported, quite possibly because many bird watchers are quite familiar with it as a common bird. Still, I mean, less common than it used to be, but a common wintering bird that stays into the spring before migrating away, and tends, I think, because of that, many bird watchers sort of overlook it, don't regard it as a breeding species, or overlook their sightings of it, and don't realise the potential for birds being breeders. So we don't get that, and the fact, like most ducks, they can be quite secretive in the breeding season, means that we probably miss quite a lot of records. Goshawk, a species that is increasing year on year, and in doing so is exceeding the ability to record it, to find all birds in some areas, particularly in the north and west. And also there's still a bit of secrecy, and I don't think all records that are made are reported through routes to get to the panel. Long-eared owl, a very difficult species and a very underreported species, secretive, nocturnal, quite widespread in many areas. I think people don't realise their presence, so we only get a small fraction of the population reported every year. And willow tit, species as well, like some of these species, well recorded, gets in complete recording in areas in which it is really rare. Areas in, say, southeast England where it's virtually disappeared, become a great rarity. There is good monitoring coverage. The problem lies in the core of its range, where in some areas it can still be relatively, not quite common, but relatively abundant. In areas of northern England, for example, and exceeds the ability of bird watchers in the county to sort of report all the birds every year. So back to this tab, and I thought what I'd do is sort of present an imaginary example of how to complete this. A number of steps. First step is the easiest one: species which do not occur. As I said before, there's no county that has all of these species occurring, so there'll be some species which just do not occur where you are. Easy, just put 0. Job done for those. Step 2 is also easy. It's the species for which you believe coverage is complete within your county for the year in question. So in which case, the second tab of your spreadsheet should have all the details, all the breeding records for this particular species. So all you need to do in the first tab is enter the total of those and then just refer to the record sheet because all the details are there. The coverage is full. Step 3, still not too difficult, still fairly straightforward. Species for which you have gaps in recording, but you believe you know what those gaps were. So known unknowns, if you use that language. So in the year in question, you know that the years of reporting from 1 or 2 sites didn't happen. You believe you know how many pairs or approximately how many pairs there should be in there, so you can add that on to what that was, the total you have in terms of data submitted. So an example here for Little Ring Clover, there might be one site which normally has 3 pairs, but which you didn't receive any records. You didn't get a null, so no reason to suspect that birds weren't there. Normally there were 3 pairs, so you'd add that on to the 11 you had and suggest 14. You put a note in to explain that. That's that done. Step 4, slightly harder. Species for which you still get quite good coverage, but it's never complete in any one given year. So you have to look at, well, how many are there likely to be? For this, it might be worth thinking about compiling a site matrix, particularly for species which repeatedly use the same sort of well-defined sites, wetland sites or raptor territories, for example. You could look at whether they've ever been surveyed in the county and refer to that if you believe that there's not been a change in the population since that survey time. Or you could look at the number of sites covered and the number of sites where the species does occur and extrapolate out from that. So here's an example for peregrine producing a species matrix of the records you did receive from County Hall in 2019 to those where you didn't receive records, but make an estimate of how many pairs would have been on that, looking at previous history. So St Mary's Church, which I made up here, is usually occupied, so probably was in 2019. Newtown Power Station, on the other hand, hasn't been occupied the previous couple of years, so maybe it's gone. And again, you would add a note in to say data received from raptor workers isn't always complete, so you've looked over the last 5 years, and that seems to be a reasonable extrapolation there. For Dartford Warbler, I've suggested another approach here. There was a survey a couple of years ago, so of 50, from the records you've received, there does seem to have been a decline, maybe the beast from the east, knocked the population down, so at well-known sites, numbers have dropped by 20, so maybe overall the population's dropped by 20, so we'll say 40. It doesn't have to be precise. You've explained what you've done. It may be slightly out. We don't mind. Step 5 is getting harder. Species for which coverage within your county is poor. Now you have to start thinking of what you can do here. Has this bird ever been surveyed in the county? Or nationally? Is it something that can be derived from a national survey? Again, could you look at the proportion of the sites covered and extrapolate out from that? Have there been studies within your region, maybe not county-wide, maybe not even within your county, but might provide some information about density, local populations that you could build on? And ask the panel if you think we might hold additional data. We're not necessarily able to share that with you, but if we hold data coming in from other sources, such as Raptor Study Group data, we might be able to say, well, we've got this many records from Raptor Study Group, so yeah, I suggest that would be a good estimate for you. Because I know the data flows aren't always perfect, and sometimes county recorders don't receive this additional data. And again, I don't know to explain. So here's some examples here for goshawk. You might just say, well, the Raptor Study Group share data with the RBBP, use the number from that. You might be a southern county where Ken Smith or people who work with Ken Smith are studying lesser-spotted woodpeckers. Is there anything that can be done from studies there? Density of 5 pairs in the southwest of the county, looking at the suitable looking woodland elsewhere in the county, adding in what records you have, be able to derive an estimate. And again, hobbies are difficult species. Even when seen frequently within counties, it can be hard to proofread and to find pairs. But there are quite a few local studies of hobbies which give some idea of densities in different parts of the countries. Could those inform what you think might be present in your county? And then finally, we have to acknowledge there are some species which are difficult to estimate because coverage is very poor, and it may be one of those species for which there is quite a large, relatively large population within your county with poor coverage. Some counties won't have this problem at all. You won't have any species which are really difficult to do. Now, some species aren't like this anywhere. Shoveler, for example, is never that poorly covered. Yeah, anywhere within its UK range that it's impossible to estimate. I don't think any of these are quite impossible to estimate. So again, we're looking for recorders to think of what's possible, look at what data's available, previous surveys, extrapolation for better study areas, looking at national estimates and thinking what proportion of the national population might be within their county, looking at densities reported in breeding bird atlases and looking at the range occupied, the number of occupied squares within your county and calculating an estimate there. Or looking at the records you have and mapping the distribution, producing an estimated density. Well, we know these tetrads or hectads are occupied, and they might have 2 pairs per hectad, so that gives an estimate of whatever. Another approach. Or even for example, red-breasted Merganser, one approach has been used has been looking at post-breeding molting flocks and trying to estimate what the breeding population that produced that molting flock might have been. It might not be perfect. It might be a bit out from reality, but it is a sensible, reasonable way of attempting it. So it's really over to you, to county recorders out there, to have a go at this, to sit down, to work through it, if necessary, to talk with others within the county, talk with species experts, talk with the red-breeding bird panel, talk with neighbouring counties as well. Ask questions, discuss approaches. So please, we are pushing to do this. We do want to try and get estimates for all relevant species for all counties in 2019, as I am following up with those county recorders over the next month or two, through to us producing the report in late 2019, 2021, sorry, for 2019, trying to fill in those gaps. So please have a go. It's valuable. Hopefully I've convinced you that this is a worthwhile thing to do. It's an interesting challenge, so please give it a go. Thank you for listening. And if you are a county bird recorder or other of the network that helps the red-breeding bird panel submit data to us, thank you for our support for the panel's work.